Hi, I'm Rodriguez, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He is an actor, writer, circus performer, and he is the author of Lilith Redemption, other than Mr. Gideon Hodge. Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Gideon. And can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Gideon Hodge. I'm a writer and actor, currently based out of Atlanta. I work back and forth between Atlanta and New Orleans quite a bit, depending on the project. A lot of focus and interest in like folklore, history, mythology and things like that. And I've definitely let that sort of thing play out a lot in my writing over the years.
Interesting, Mr. Gideon. So can you tell us, being an author, you are also an actor. Can you tell us about that?
So being an author and an actor is kind of like living on both ends of the social scale. Actors, you're supposed to be very extroverted. You're supposed to be very, out there in the public eye, interacting with people a lot. Author, complete opposite. You're locked in a room by yourself, quiet, just, living off of coffee and broken dreams for, months on end as you're trying to get the next manuscript together.
Oh, yes. So what do you think the big difference of being an actor and an author?
Having taught workshops in both, I've had to look at this a little differently. I would say an actor has to focus outward, and a writer needs to focus inward. So, the simplest terms, and don't get me wrong, like writers should definitely be observing the world around them and be, making, taking notes about how people speak, about, social interactions and things like that. All these things will make you a better writer and an actor. But from a writer's perspective, you are the one creating the content. The content is being generated from your imagination, from your experiences. Acting, you are reacting to things, so your experiences come to it to a certain degree, but you are interpreting somebody else's message. And so you want your focus as much as possible to be on the situation around you, on the other characters or actors that you are interacting with. So I would say, yeah, your focus, is in very different places, being an actor or being a writer.
So which one do you prefer, being an actor or being an author?
That is a tough one. I guess it depends on the day. If I'm in a more energetic mood, I definitely want to be out and playing around and playing a character with other people, getting to meet other actors and things like that. If it's a rainy day and I'm just nursing some coffee or some hot tea, that's my writing days, if that makes sense. I mean, I definitely, have to shift gears depending on what's needed of me at the time. But yeah, I would say it depends on the day, but whatever is needed of me, that's what I'm going to try to give.
Very well said, Mr. Gideon. So, what initial steps you one take begin to the process of writing a book?
Oh gosh. I think it's a little bit different for everyone. For me, I tend to think of the place first, and I know I'm a little off from other writers that I know. I think most writers tend to think of the character first, or the predicament. I tend to think of the setting. So I think of where is this taking place? And then I kind of work backwards from there. So I'll figure out my setting, then I figure out my characters. I figure out, okay, who can play around here? And then over time, the struggle, the conflict kind of manifests organically, in my opinion, because people have needs, people have wants. And so the struggles or the goals of those characters starts to move the story.
Well said, Mr. Gideon. So, how important is the outlining before diving into writing the first draft?
I am probably not the best person to answer that because I do it a little backwards. So I start writing first and then I do an outline. And then I will basically compare my notes with the outline. I'm probably doing it the long way around, if I'm being honest. I would say if I was suggesting this to a newer writer, I would probably suggest get your outline first. But sometimes I don't feel like I know the story well enough until I've written a few chapters, until I've written numerous scenes, and then I'm like, okay, this is who these people are, this is the world that I'm in, because the tone will be different, and then based on my own observations of what I've already written, that informs me better on the outlining process.
Interesting. So, how does one choose the right setting of your story and why it is important?
How do I choose a specific story, or how did I choose this story for Lilith's Redemption?
Both.
Hmm. All right, so how to choose a story. I'm not sure if I've ever really chosen a story. Like I've never sat down and say, okay, I'm going to write about this. The ideas just kind of pop into my head over time, and then the ones that stick, the ones that don't go away, those are the ones that I sit and write more of. Um, you know, I have piles of notebooks that just absolutely drive my wife crazy because they're just stuffed into every nook and cranny of the house I can get away with. But I'm constantly writing down scenes, concepts, and characters, and then as something manifests into a larger story or it just kind of sticks with me, I'm like, I need to tell this story. So, for instance, Lilith's Redemption. So that's a nice dovetail into how I wrote Lilith's Redemption. Lilith's Redemption, I had run across some literature in like some video games and some fantasy stories, and I felt like they just never really did Lilith justice. Being somebody that's heavily into mythology like I am, I had read a lot of the stories about Lilith, about her story, and I felt like no one was really telling that story. People were making her kind of a one-dimensional bad guy, a demon, a vampire, and she's so much more than that. Uh, when you go into the mythos, in the mythos, she's kind of the first sorcerer. So if you follow, certain hermetic texts, learning somebody's true name, like a spirit or a demon's true name, gives you power over them. In the stories, Lilith, and this is the mythology. This isn't even my book. In the mythology, Lilith learns the true name of God, and that is the only time that I've ever seen that written down of a human being learning the true name of God and having a certain degree of control over him. That would be considered heretical in a lot of belief systems. So that alone sets Lilith apart. Then you have her being the only human to leave, the Garden of Eden before the fall. So she has her own life and adventures in the lands beyond before, before the exodus of Adam and Eve from Eden. Then, she has these hordes of demonic children. She is created to be this boogeyman by the Middle Ages. She makes a pact with the archangels, and the pact with the archangels is that she will not harm any human children, that they're the symbol of the archangels. So all this fascinating stuff that's just very different than any other myth that I had come across. I mean, each myth is unique in its own way, but I felt like Lilith had a very real story that I wanted told. So when I set this in a more modern context, or contemporary context rather, I wanted Lilith's story. I wanted to stay as true to the spirit of her story as I could, while layering in bits of the mythology throughout the course of the book.
Well said, Mr. Gideon. So, what techniques can help in developing compelling and believable characters?
Compelling and believable characters. One, I would listen to people. Listen to people talk. Listen. There's certain cadences of speech. So I've actually borrowed from a few people that I know their cadence of speech, the way they talk. and I've created characters, with a little bit of their personality. So you might have friends, family members, things like that that just have really big, bold personalities, and they will, just by borrowing that cadence of speech, that will help you build a very specific character. Anime is very good at this, where they create these very strong archetypes. So these characters are very distinct in their personality and the way they convey themselves. And so, even if, and I mean, even if I can't remember all the names of the characters in a given anime, I will remember the character. I will remember, oh, that's the big brawny guy that has this weird obsession with paper dolls and stuff like that, and the characters just resonate in your mind. Um, After studying either characters in other people's stories, characters in movies, studying real people, after that, you want to give your character real needs, wants, and quirks. So nobody's perfect. Everybody's got some sort of flaw, even if they don't see it. And that flaw could be something as simple as not believing in yourself. Slade. So in my new series, Aethersphere, one of Slade's major issues is that he's been so beaten down by the system that he grew up in that he has been told that he is nothing, that he is worthless over and over again by people in authority over him. And so after a while, he started to believe it. And the new friends that he makes don't understand the psychological damage that he's gone through throughout his journey. And they're trying to engage with him on their level, and he's still kind of dealing with the trauma of his upbringing while they're going through their adventures together. And so, you want to have, and quirks could also be things like a character could be very selfish, or self-absorbed, or easily distracted, and you want this to play into the story. So then the next part would be their wants. What is the character after? Because if the character doesn't want anything, then there's no story. So you want the character to have some sort of goal, some sort of thing that they're after, and then it gets fun because you can structure between wants and needs. So the character might want to be the CEO of a big company, right? That's their goal throughout the course of the story. But their need is to establish genuine human connection. And so while they're chasing their wants, they start accomplishing the need instead. And a need they might not even necessarily know that is there. And that's why a lot of times, especially in comedies, the character will not achieve the goal that they wanted, but they will achieve the goal that they needed. And so this inner development happens that they probably weren't even aware of, or, towards the, like, 2/3 into the story, the goal shifts, where the character is like, I was after this one thing. I wanted this star restaurant. I wanted this, high-end job or whatever. And then they realize that this person they've fallen in love with and this new, like, family that they've developed throughout the course of the story is way more important to them. So that last part of the story is them finishing the want goal, finishing what they wanted, but then realizing that as they step back, it's like, you know what, I don't need that. I need this other thing that I found along the way, and that is much more important to me. And you see that play a lot in the really good stories, comedies. A lot of Disney films have this. But yeah, a believable, genuine want and need that the character explores throughout the course of the story, and you'll have an engaging story every time.
Very well said, Mr. Gideon. But before we
Thank
go
you.
on, I want to shout out my ranking tops in the last 30 days according to Apple chart, because in Bolivia I got number 2 on the Apple chart, Pakistan at number 8,
All
Nigeria
right.
at number 12, Bhutan at 14, United Arab Emirates at 16, Jamaica at 56, Cameroon at 76, Cambodia at 140, and a lot more. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, like Mr. Gideon Hodge. So, Mr.
Hello,
Gideon,
everyone.
let's talk about Lilith Redemption. How did you craft it?
How did I craft it? So I
Yes.
went into mythology first. I spent probably about a year and a half just finding any text I could on her. I actually was doing the research for this back in the early 2000s, so it wasn't just like a simple Google search back then. Don't get me wrong, like, internet engines and search engines did exist back then, but I did a lot of library work. I did a lot of traveling to different libraries, calling, seeing who had books that kind of fit with what I was discussing, and putting together something that are putting together notes to find out the things that I explained earlier. The to put together the mythos. So like the bit about the angels, that was one bit of text that I found in one book. The bit about the demons and the storyline of her adventures in they called it Nod, the realm beyond Eden. That was in another book. Then just sort of slowly, piecing all this together. And while that was happening, I was very interested in, I guess the genre is called urban fantasy. So things like, Dresden Files, Laurel K. Hamilton, Buffy the Vampire Slayer could be considered among there. And I love that sort of urban feel, but with supernatural characters around us that we're not aware of, that common person is not aware of what's going on there. And so that was kind of the backdrop in which I told the story. And then the characters, I honestly can't remember where the characters came into my mind. I think I had some close friends at the time that were dealing with some trauma. I was starting, this is way before the Me Too movement, but can you hold on one moment? Where's my, all right. Sorry, having some sound issues over here. So this was way before the Me Too movement, but I had started finding out about some abuses some friends of mine had suffered when they were younger, and it really shook me because I didn't realize at the time how common that sort of thing was. And so two of the main characters in Lilith's Redemption are trauma survivors, and they are dealing with or reconciling with the emotional and physical abuse that they had suffered, and figuring out how to move forward. And the two girls are, um, they had reacted to their trauma very differently. So Christina reacted to her trauma by internalizing it and blaming herself, whereas Amanda reacted to her trauma by externalizing it and blaming others. And so she has a lot of rage and a lot of anger at other people. And as she's being trained to be a demon hunter, she kind of lashes out occasionally at people that kind of trigger her trauma responses. And then Christina internalizes and blames herself for things. So they're working out a relationship with each other, but there is that disconnect that they have to work past throughout the course of the story. So even though there's this broader story of them hunting down these demons, there is the very real story, the human element of them dealing with their own history and their own want to be closer to each other while having very different ways of processing their internal wounds.
Well said, Mr. Gideon. So, what are effective ways to build a plot that keeps readers engaged from beginning to end in Lilith's Redemption?
So you want to keep the focus on the conflict. I think sometimes, and don't get me wrong, you want moments for the story to breathe. It doesn't have to be action all the way through. So you have times that the characters are talking about their own wants and needs. They're talking about, tangential things from their history. But you want as much as possible for all of that other stuff in the story, the interactions, the interactions between the characters, the love stories, the gain and loss that the characters suffer throughout the course of the story. You want it to connect to the central theme, the central plot. And so I think where some writers, or younger writers or earlier writers fall down on this is that they have these very tangential chapters that don't really have anything to do with the story, or the main story. And that's where they start to lose the audience. You're watching this movie, and then there's like a couple of scenes where you're like, what is going on here? This has nothing to do with what we were, what the story was about, 2 scenes ago. And people start to check out. So you want to keep it connected with the central story, and having a theme isn't a bad idea. So you want to explore themes like, how far, not one theme would be, how do you repair trust once it's broken? Another theme would be what is the extent of the bonds of loyalty? And so the things that happen throughout the story test that theme, and you're playing with that theme throughout the course of the story, and that kind of becomes like a glue or even a rubber band that helps pull everything back together for the central plot. And plot and story they hold hands, but they're not necessarily the same thing. So plot is going to be your sequence of events. So if you're taking like a Tolkien or a classical fantasy, the plot is the evil witch, lord, demigod, whoever has their thing that they're doing, and the characters are all working to keep that evil person from succeeding. But the story is the relationship between those characters. So in Lord of the Rings, the story is Frodo's struggle with the ring. The plot is all this stuff dealing with Sauron and Saruman and these big armies, but the story is about this one small person that is struggling with the temptation of the ring and trust, because they have to figure out, can I trust the people around me to get this ring where it needs to be, or are they going to try to take it like Boromir does? Or when Frodo finally goes off on his own and is like, you know what, this ring is going to destroy everybody around me. If it's going to destroy somebody, it's going to just be me. And that's why early on in the story, he just heads off by himself, and then the rest of that journey is him and Sam.
Interesting, Mr. Gideon. So, how can you ensure the Lilith redemption theme is clearly communicated and impactful?
So on my end, the theme is clearly communicated and impactful. Again, just telling a genuine story. So having, I set my backdrop. I had this story about, demon hunting, but then partway through the story, and I want to be careful not to give away too much of a spoiler, but you find out, or Lilith is Laylah is the human avatar in this story. She is confronted with some revelations about her demon hunts. She's been hunting the demons, she's been doing what she thinks she needs to, and then she comes upon a few demons halfway through the story that are very different than anything she's encountered before. They have a different moral compass. They are not the, bloodthirsty monsters that she is used to dealing with. And after speaking with them, she has to make some very real decisions of how she's going to move forward in her quest, because everything isn't as black and white as she thought it was. And so to keep it impactful for the readers, I aside from keeping the story engaging, keeping the plot moving, I need to have very honest and real interactions of people struggling at a partner has cheated on us. There's a very real struggle there. Do we try to repair this relationship, or do we move on? Any betrayal of trust. Do we try to repair the relationship, or do we move on? And there's going to be a struggle there, because it's going to hurt either way. And sometimes I think that's the most compelling conflict, is that there's not necessarily a right answer. You put your characters in these positions, and a lot of stories is like, oh, well, we have to do this one thing. This is very clearly the directions we have to go to beat the bad guy and save the day. There's other times that it's not as clear. One story might just have all the good guys band together and go fight the bad guy. The other stories might have the good guys band together, and then we either save this town of 1,000 people, or we sacrifice one of the people on our team. Which is the right choice? And if it's just a numbers game, then it's like, okay, we sacrifice one of our teammates and we save 1,000 people, but now we knowingly sacrifice somebody that we care about, that we love, our team is weaker moving forward because we don't have that person. Maybe that person had a special skill that really helped them throughout the story. And so having conflict where your character, I don't want to say no-win situations, but your character is put into situations where there isn't a clear right answer from their vantage point, or there is no clear right answer. Their damage is going to be done to people no matter which way that character moves.
Well done, Mr. Gideon. So, what role does research play in enhancing the authenticity of Lilith Redemption?
So, I mean, research is going to create the texture in the background, and I think texture is important. Neil Gaiman refers to it as smudges in the background. You know, there's little bits that you put into your story that may only be, a sentence, a fragment of a sentence, but it adds, context and layers to the story. So, for instance, all the research that I did in mythology, I didn't write a book on mythology. I wrote a book on Lila's redemption, on Laylah's struggle throughout the story, but the mythology is in the background. So everything that's going on in the story has that mythology as its backdrop, and so that plays a role in it. And the fun thing with mythology is that you are able to give this sort of grandiose backdrop that the characters, even though they're 25, 27 years old, 30 years old, that they are engaging in a conflict that is thousands of years old, that is so far beyond them, but that there's huge repercussions, that they are dealing with events that are far bigger than they are. And that definitely helped me lay the context. Plus, it was fun. I enjoy researching. I might be a little odd in that regard. I took a different route than my contemporaries in college. I knew a lot of people that were getting creative writing and English degrees, which I don't see anything wrong with that, but I went a different route. I decided to get a history degree. I wanted to have a large store of stories to pull from. And so that way, whenever I sit down to write, I'm thinking about the history of the place. I'm thinking about, special events that, are catalysts for change throughout the course of the story or throughout the history of that world. And then, with mythology and folklore, I've got, hundreds of different, mini stories in my head that I can kind of pull from as I need to. So that's been kind of my journey as a writer.
Yes, interesting journey of writing, Mr. Gideon. But before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our fourth season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chef in one of the five-star restaurants in downtown Toronto. So please do listen to our
Definitely.
latest episode. We talk about Parmigiana, people. Parmigiana, one of the trademark of Italian cuisine. Not only one, but 13 volumes, people. Food 101, Volume 1, Basics until 13 is only the books that you need to create a delicious food. Available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. So, Mr. Gideon, this is not your latest book, Lilith Redemption. My apologies. So, let's talk about last.
All
So,
right, you want to shoot for
Lilith
Friday?
Redemption, what do you think the best highlight?
The best highlight for Lilith's Redemption. I would say the part that got commented on the most, the part that readers reached out to me and were like, "This is a part that really hit me." It was when Laylah meets these demons that they found a different path. I don't want to give it away because it's a fun reveal, but she discovers that these demons have found a different path of morality from their colleagues, and that they have tried to find a higher path to follow, and that whole sequence of events seemed to really resonate with my readers, and it's been really fun listening to them talk about how it affected them.
Certainly. So, Mr. Gideon, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Oh, sure, yes. So Lilith's Redemption is under the name Gideon Hodge, and then my My other books are Kazmer the Cat, Kazimer. That one's under the pen name of Nicholas Baxter, as well as Aethersphere, which is the beginning of a steampunk fantasy series, broad sweeping world there. A lot of history and things like that, as we talked about. The second book of that comes out later this year. I decided to create a secondary pen name because my acting and my first book, Lilith's Redemption, are not really child appropriate. Some violent themes in there, and I've been in a wide range of films, and not all of them child appropriate. So when I decided I was going to be writing for children, I wanted to have a name that kind of distinguished that. So if you pick up a Nicholas Baxter book, that's safe for kids. If you pick up a Gideon Hodge book, I would say maybe 15 and up for that.
And thank you for sharing to the world your talents and being a writer or being an actor. So, Mr. Gideon, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.